Naledi was the quietest child in the village of Malapo, a girl whose presence was like a soft breeze that barely stirred the leaves. She spoke little, preferring to watch the world with wide, thoughtful eyes, and the villagers often mocked her for it. Whispers followed her through the market, at the well, and even along the dusty paths leading to the fields. "Why does she always hide behind her silence?" they would say. Her stepfamily, however, nurtured a deeper hatred, a fire more dangerous than the one that would come later. Her stepmother had never forgiven Naledi's mother for the old secrets she carried, secrets that had once protected the village from unseen dangers. Now, with her mother gone, that resentment had found its mark in the gentle girl who dared not fight back. Every day Naledi bore their cruel words and cold stares, her small heart quietly gathering strength, though none could see it. Malapo was a village where tales of fire spirits circulated in every hearth and home. People spoke of the spirits who watched over the brave and punished the cruel, of flames that could burn away lies and reveal truth. Naledi, with her silent courage, was largely invisible to these stories, until the night that changed everything. It began as a night like any other, with the village settling into sleep under the silver gaze of the moon. But mischief lurked in the hearts of the chief's sons. They had heard the whispers about Naledi, about her quiet ways, about the perceived oddness of her habits, and in their cruelty they devised a prank. They set fire to the small hut at the edge of the village, thinking it would scare her, maybe even teach her to speak, but they could not foresee the power that lay in her stillness. As the flames licked the wooden walls, Naledi tried to escape, but the fire spread faster than her small nimble feet could run. Smoke filled her lungs, heat seared her skin, and yet, despite the terror and pain, she did not scream in fear. Her breath caught in her chest, and in that moment, something miraculous happened. Her last exhale shimmered, turned to light, a tiny glowing ember that hovered just above her lips, then floated upward, merging with the flickering fire. The village heard the crackling blaze and rushed to the hut, but it was too late. All that remained was smoke, ash, and a faint golden glow that vanished into the night. The villagers assumed she had perished, their hearts heavy with sorrow and guilt, though none dared admit any suspicion of the chief's sons. Yet the whispers began, carried from mouth to mouth, from hut to hut. "The fire spirits take only the chosen," they said in hushed tones. Those who had once mocked her now spoke her name with fear and awe, sensing, though they could not see, that the quiet girl had become something more than human. The fire had not consumed her, it had transformed her, forging a spirit in its heat, a courage and strength that no cruelty or mischief could ever extinguish. Naledi's silence had always been mistaken for weakness, but now, in the afterglow of the fire, it became a power the village would never forget. Inside the fire, Naledi felt herself no longer bound by the fragile limitations of her human body. The heat that should have consumed her instead carried her into a world unseen by the living, a realm where shadows danced with light and the air shimmered with whispers older than the village itself. Circling her were the fire spirits, beings of pure flame and ember, their eyes glowing like molten gold and their forms twisting and flickering like smoke caught in the wind. They did not attack, they did not burn her. Instead, they moved with a grace that suggested both judgment and welcome, and their voices, soft as crackling tinder, spoke directly to her soul. "Fear made them cruel, flame will make you whole," they murmured, their words wrapping around her like a warm shawl against the chill of betrayal and pain. Naledi's mind swirled with the images of the village, of the faces that had mocked her, of her stepmother's cruel glares, of the chief's son's arrogant laughter. Yet the fear that had gripped her melted into a calm certainty, and for the first time she understood that the fire was not punishment, it was transformation. Her body began to dissolve, her skin and bones turning to smoke and ember, leaving behind nothing of the girl who had been so timid and unseen. In their place arose a new form, something neither wholly human nor completely spirit, glowing with a light born from both suffering and resilience. She had become the Embered One, a being capable of walking between the realm of life and the realm of fire, a bridge between what was and what could never be forgotten. As the flames carried her upward, she felt herself lifted from the ashes of her former life, rising higher than any roof, past the charred remains of the hut that had tried to claim her. She moved silently, unseen by human eyes, leaving behind only traces of warmth and the faint scent of smoke. The village slept, oblivious to the presence that now watched over it, but the animals of the night did not. Dogs howled as she passed, their cries sharp and echoing, as if sensing the extraordinary power that had been forged in fire. Even the wind seemed to shift, bending around her form, carrying whispers that promised both reckoning and protection. Though she had been broken by cruelty and trapped by malice, Naledi now felt an unshakable wholeness, a strength no blade, no flame, no fear could touch. She was free and yet bound to the village, bound not by human weakness but by the fiery justice that now ran through her veins. Every spark in her being pulsed with the memory of pain, yet it was tempered by a new purpose, a clarity born of the fire's embrace. She was no longer just a girl, she was a spirit, a force, a warning and a guardian, and in the silence of the night she walked among shadows and flame, ready to awaken when the cruelty of the living demanded that she rise. The village of Malapo tried to return to normal, as if the fire had been nothing more than a passing shadow. They rebuilt the burnt huts quickly, stacking new wood and plaster over the blackened remains, and painted over the scorched walls, pretending the tragedy had never happened. Laughter returned to the market, and children played along the dusty paths, but the laughter carried a brittle edge as though it feared being swallowed by the memory of flames. Her stepfamily moved even faster, claiming Naledi's few possessions, tattered blankets, a small clay pot, and a comb that had belonged to her mother, as if taking them would erase suspicion. They spoke in hurried whispers, forcing themselves to believe the story they had woven, that she was gone, lost to the fire, and that nothing else needed to be said. The chief's sons paraded through the village, their chests puffed with pride, boasting that no one saw anything, their bravado masking the tremor in their hands and the sweat on their brows. But the village could not escape what had been unleashed. Strange signs began to appear, subtle at first, as though the very air carried the memory of Naledi's last embered breath. At dawn, soot footprints would appear across the village paths, blackened imprints that faded with the rising sun but left hearts pounding with unease. Doors bore strange markings, burnt handprints pressed into wood as though a phantom had reached for them, fingerprints of fire that should have vanished yet lingered in faint, ghostly outlines. Smoke, thin and curling like tendrils of memory, would seep under beds at night, moving as if it had its own will, disappearing only when the first crow of morning dared to pierce the darkness. Even the animals sensed the presence of something more than human. Cats hissed at empty corners, dogs growled at shadows that seemed to flicker with embers, and the birds refused to roost where the smoke lingered. The old women of the village, the keepers of tales and traditions, whispered in corners, their voices trembling yet steady with knowing. "Someone walks in the fire," they murmured, nodding toward the huts that had been rebuilt too quickly, toward the empty spaces where Naledi's spirit had once been. Mothers told their children not to linger near the paths at night, not to listen for the crackle of unseen flames, and the children, though curious, obeyed with wide-eyed fear. Even the chief, normally confident and commanding, began to feel the weight of eyes that could not be seen, of flames that watched and waited. Malapo had moved on too fast, but the fire had not forgotten. It lingered in the edges of the village, in the shadows of the walls, in the whispered breaths of those who had ignored what had truly happened. And Naledi, forged by flame and sorrow, watched it all, invisible yet present, her embered form moving silently through the nights, testing the hearts of those who had thought to bury the truth beneath ashes and lies. The village could rebuild, the chief's sons could boast, her stepfamily could steal her possessions. But no amount of wood, plaster, or paint could cover the presence of a spirit born from fire, a quiet girl who had become more than they could ever imagine. At night, when the village of Malapo slept under the silvery gaze of the moon, Naledi walked among the paths and huts, her form a soft glow of ember and smoke. She moved silently, each step careful yet purposeful, her memories unfolding with every shadow she passed. She remembered the faces that had mocked her quietness, the cruel laughter of the chief's sons, the sharp glances of her stepmother, and the whispered insults of neighbors who had thought her too small, too gentle, too fragile to matter. Her heart, once weighed with fear, now throbbed with a smoldering power, a heat that refused to consume the world but still carried the mark of her pain. As she remembered, her emotions stirred the air around her. Sparks leapt from the ground like fireflies, curling and twining around her without ever setting anything ablaze. Flame danced in her wake, a trail of ethereal light that marked the path of her quiet vengeance, visible only to those who watched with the wide-eyed attention of fear or wonder. Children, often awake with curiosity or restlessness, claimed they saw a girl glowing like charcoal, drifting between huts and through the fields. Some whispered that she was an angel of light sent to protect the innocent. Others shivered, claiming she was a ghost, a spirit of the fire come to judge the living. The village's old stories suddenly felt real, alive in a way no one could have imagined. Fear, once dormant and hidden behind laughter and bravado, began to spread quietly through Malapo. Mothers pulled their children closer at night, telling them, "Do not follow the lights, do not answer the flames," while fathers spoke in hushed tones near the hearth, afraid to challenge a presence they could not see yet could feel in the heat of their dreams. The chief too felt the creeping unease. His sons trembled in their beds, waking from dreams filled with heat and shadows, and he could no longer dismiss the strange occurrences as coincidence. In desperation, he called upon the village's fire reader, an old mystic woman whose wisdom was as deep as the roots of the oldest trees. She wore robes woven with threads that flickered like dying embers and carried with her a staff etched with symbols of the fire spirits. Her eyes, pale and unyielding, scanned the village, lingering on the paths where soot and smoke seemed to linger long after the human eye could see. "A spirit seeks justice," she said, her voice low and steady, echoing with authority. "Someone lied about the flames. The girl is not gone. She walks among you, born of fire, shaped by pain, and nothing that lives can ignore her." Her words fell like a shadow over the village, chilling hearts more than the night air could. Even those who had once laughed at Naladi's quiet ways felt the weight of her presence pressing upon them, unseen yet undeniable. The children's whispers grew into murmurs, the mother's warnings into quiet panic, and the men's bravado began to falter. Every door, every wall, every path seemed to carry the subtle glow of ember, a reminder that the girl who had been trapped in the fire had returned not for destruction, but for reckoning. As Naladi wandered, each memory of cruelty and mockery fueled the small sparks around her. She did not seek to burn, did not seek to harm. The flames obeyed her will, bending and twisting like living threads, warning the guilty, protecting the innocent, and spreading a fear that was more powerful than any blade. Malapo had rebuilt its walls and painted over its past, but nothing could erase the trails of the embered girl who walked silently between life and fire, whose presence reminded every soul that justice, even when slow and quiet, could never be denied. The first to feel Naladi's presence was her stepmother, the woman whose heart had been hardened by jealousy and old secrets, and her stepsister, who had eagerly followed in her mother's footsteps of cruelty. They slept in their beds, pretending the fire had been an unfortunate accident, as if the girl they had tormented was lost forever. But as night fell, the air shifted around them. Their water jugs, which had once sat calmly by the fire, began to bubble and boil with an unseen heat. The sound of hissing water filled the room, a warning and a whisper at once. Their mats, carefully rolled and laid in the corner, glowed faintly with warmth that spread to their hands and feet, a heat that was not dangerous but undeniably present. Shadows flickered on the walls as though flames danced there, twisting into shapes that resembled a girl, her face quiet yet full of power, staring directly at them from every corner. At first they dismissed these occurrences as dreams, a trick of the mind after a long day. But the nights became a cycle of unease, each one growing stranger than the last. Stepmother began to wake in cold sweats, her eyes wide and searching, only to find her daughter mimicking her every movement in the shadows, silent yet impossible to ignore. Every whisper, every crackle of fire seemed to carry the soft voice of Naladi, calling her name. She would jolt awake, heart pounding, and the faint glow would vanish before she could point to it. The stepsister too began to see glimpses, a form at the doorway, hair flickering like smoke, eyes that shone with ember light. As the night stretched on, stepmother's dreams grew more vivid, terrifying in their clarity. She dreamed of the fire swallowing her home, of Naladi walking through the flames untouched, her gaze unwavering and full of silent accusation. The warmth of the embered spirit pressed against her chest even in sleep, a reminder that the girl she had tried to destroy was more alive than she had ever been. Each morning she awoke screaming, the words spilling out before thought could catch them. "She is back! She is back in the heat!" she would cry, the village stirred by her voice, their ears filled with terror at the thought of a spirit walking among them. The stepsister, though younger and braver in some ways, could not escape the fear that her own mother felt. She saw the fear reflected in every mirror, every shadow, every flicker of light that the village had once called mundane. It was as though the very air had been claimed by Naladi, a presence that could not be ignored or denied. At night, she would hear the soft crackle of embers near her bed, small sparks leaping from the corners as if dancing in anticipation. She would pull the covers over her head, trembling, yet unable to escape the sense that the quiet girl she had once mocked had returned, reborn from fire and pain, stronger than any human cruelty could ever imagine. Even when they tried to leave their beds and flee to other rooms, the heat followed them. Water jugs boiled in kitchens they entered, mats glowed beneath their feet, and shadows stretched and twisted to form a silent, accusatory silhouette. The stepmother's cries became a herald to the village, a sign that the fire had not forgotten, that the girl of quiet flames had returned to claim her place, not through destruction, but through the unrelenting presence of justice. Every heartbeat in the house seemed to echo the soft rhythm of the embered spirit's steps, a reminder that Naledi was no longer a girl to be feared only in life. She was a spirit, walking unseen, shaping the nights with warmth, shadow, and flame, ensuring that cruelty would never again rest easy. The chief's sons, who had once boasted of their cleverness and strength, found themselves powerless in the grip of a fear unlike anything they had known. Night after night, Naledi appeared in their dreams, her form a burning silhouette that hovered over their sleeping bodies, unyielding and radiant with ember light. Her eyes, though silent, glowed with accusation, and her presence carried the weight of every insult, every shove, every cruel word they had spoken to the quiet girl they had thought weak. They tried to turn away, to close their eyes tighter, but the embered spirit would not be denied. Her flames licked the edges of their dreams, scorching not their flesh but their pride and certainty, leaving a smoldering fear that lingered long after they awoke. Their weapons, once symbols of power and control, betrayed them in subtle, terrifying ways. Spears that had struck at enemies and animals alike now burned to the touch when held, the shafts too hot to grip without wincing, and the tips flaring faintly with heat as if touched by an invisible flame. One of the sons woke one morning to find his hair singed along the hairline, the scent of smoke clinging to his scalp despite his desperate scrubbing. The other began stuttering, unable to speak more than a few words without pausing, his voice trembling as he insisted that he saw Naledi in the flames of the cooking fires, dancing across the pots and pans with a silent intensity that chilled him to the bone. Even the bravest men in the village began to notice the unease in their bodies, a tremor in their hands and a shiver down their spines whenever fire was near. The chief, proud and commanding, was unaccustomed to such displays of weakness from his sons. He demanded silence, instructing them to speak no word of their fear, to carry on as if nothing unusual had occurred. But even he could not ignore the signs. Shadows in the hallways seemed to twist unnaturally, and the night carried a faint warmth in corners where no fire burned. The chief, who had once held the village with authority and decisiveness, found his certainty shaking. He could command soldiers, farmers and tradesmen, but a spirit born of fire and betrayal, a girl forged in flames, could not be controlled. Desperate and fearful, he sought counsel from the fire reader, the mystic woman whose eyes had seen the patterns of flame and fate for decades. She listened quietly as he recounted the events, the strange marks on their weapons, the dreams that shook his sons, the trembling that had taken hold of their hands. Her face remained pale and unreadable, yet her eyes glimmered with knowledge older than the village itself. Finally she spoke, her voice calm yet firm, echoing like the soft crackle of embers in a hearth. "You cannot command a spirit forged by betrayal," she said. "The girl walks not as your servant, not as a mortal to be bent by fear or authority. She walks because the fire made her whole, because the pain you inflicted could not destroy her, only transform her. You may try to hide, to deny, to silence what you cannot see, but her presence is here, and it will not be ignored." The chief's sons, who had once believed themselves untouchable, trembled at her words. They felt the heat of guilt pressing against their chests, the weight of their lies and cruelty forming invisible shackles that tightened with every heartbeat. Fire, they realized, was no longer merely a tool for warmth or destruction. It was a living force intertwined with Naledi's spirit, and it moved according to her will. No command, no order, no denial could contain it. And as the night stretched on, they awoke once again to dreams of burning silhouettes, to weapons that burned in their hands, and to the unshakable knowledge that the girl they had thought destroyed had returned, reborn, and far stronger than any of them could ever have imagined. The village of Malapo prepared for its annual fire festival with great excitement, a night meant to honor the flame spirits and bring warmth, protection and good fortune to every household. Torches were lit along the streets, drums were polished and readied, and the villagers donned colorful garments, moving with a rhythm that had been passed down through generations. Yet, as the festival began, it quickly became clear that this year would be unlike any other. The torches, which should have burned straight and steady, wavered and bent unnaturally, their flames twisting toward those who had carried cruelty in their hearts. Shadows leapt from the fire, casting shapes that seemed too purposeful to be coincidence. Each flame seemed to pulse with intention, bending as though guided by an unseen hand, marking the guilty for all to feel but not yet see. The drums, normally deep and comforting, cracked and splintered from the heat that rose unnaturally from the festival grounds. Each beat was irregular, carrying a tension that tightened the air and set the villagers' nerves on edge. Even the ashes scattered along the pathways began to shift, forming faint lines that spelled the name of the girl no one had expected to return. Naledi, the whispers of ash red in the faint glow of torchlight, a warning written by fire itself. The villagers gasped, some trembling, some turning pale, but no one could find the source of the mysterious inscriptions. The air was heavy with the scent of smoke and ember, carrying the promise of something extraordinary, something powerful enough to bend the festival itself to its will. Then, in the center of the square, as drums beat unevenly and torches flickered wildly, Naledi manifested. For a heartbeat, she appeared fully, her form glowing with the intensity of ember and flame. Her eyes shone like molten gold, her hair flowed like smoke trailing in the night, and the air around her vibrated with the heat of her presence. The villagers saw her for only an instant, but that moment was enough. Screams erupted as fear and awe collided. Children clung to their mothers, adults stumbled backward, and even the bravest men found themselves frozen in terror. The chief's sons fell to their knees, feeling the sting of every wrong they had committed, the flames reflecting the weight of their guilt back at them. No one dared move closer, and the torches, bending further, seemed to form a circle of both protection and accusation around the girl of quiet flames. For that fleeting heartbeat, the village was united in awe and fear. Naledi did not speak, did not lift a hand to strike, yet the power she radiated demanded respect. The flames responded to her silently, bending, twisting, and marking the guilty while leaving the innocent untouched. The villagers realized that this was not simply a festival, but a reckoning. The air shimmered with the heat of her presence, a living reminder that the girl who had been trapped in fire had returned not for revenge alone, but for justice, for recognition, and for the remembrance of the wrongs that had been ignored for too long. And then, as suddenly as she appeared, she vanished. The village was left in chaos, the drumbeats echoing unevenly in the night, the torches quivering as though afraid to remain still. Ashes spelled her name one last time before scattering into the wind, carrying her warning to every corner. Screams and whispers filled the air, but the message was clear. Naledi had returned, her spirit forged in flames, her presence undeniable, and the village could no longer pretend that the past had been forgotten. Every heart in Malapo, from the smallest child to the oldest elder, knew that the girl of quiet flames now walked among them, a force both terrifying and sacred, and that nothing, no lie or denial, could diminish her power. Terrified beyond measure, the stepmother fled from her hut, clutching her shawl tightly around her trembling shoulders. Each step toward the river shrine felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of her guilt pressed against her chest with invisible hands. The moon reflected on the water, casting silver streaks across the stones, and she shivered not from cold but from the realization that the fire she had tried to dismiss, the spirit she had hoped would never return, was alive in ways she could not comprehend. Her heart pounded with fear, every beat echoing the memory of her cruelty, the years of jealousy and lies that had built walls between her conscience and her humanity. The path to the shrine seemed endless, the shadows of trees stretching like dark fingers, whispering reminders of every insult, every stolen moment of happiness from the girl she had tormented. Finally, she reached the river shrine, a sacred place where villagers sought guidance, blessing, and absolution. Kneeling on the cold stones, she bowed her head, hands pressed together, and began to confess aloud, her voice shaking as it filled the night air. She spoke first of her jealousy, the green-eyed envy that had festered for years, turning her heart against the child she had once promised to care for. She confessed the lies she had told, the whispered accusations she had spread to make others doubt Naledi, to make her appear weak and insignificant in the eyes of the village. She spoke of the cruelty she had inflicted daily, from harsh words to stolen possessions, the sharp glares and slaps that had left marks unseen yet deeply felt. And she spoke, finally, of her hatred for Naledi's mother, a woman whose wisdom and quiet strength had eclipsed her own, leaving a wound that had never healed and that had been passed down like a poison into her treatment of the girl. Then, with tears streaming down her face, she revealed the deepest truth, the one that had burdened her most heavily. She had seen who had trapped Naledi in the fire that fateful night, the chief's sons with their reckless pride and cruelty, but she had remained silent. She had said nothing, hiding the truth beneath a veil of convenience, cowardice, and fear. The words trembled on her lips, breaking free at last after years of holding them back. As her confession poured into the river's flowing water, a strange response followed. Instead of the cool, soothing mist that normally rose from the surface, the river exhaled steam, thick and curling, carrying the heat of judgment rather than the relief of absolution. The air around the shrine grew heavy, filled with a scent of warmth, embers, and something indefinably alive. From the shadows nearby, Naledi listened, her form hidden yet glowing faintly like a candle in the darkness. She heard every word, felt the trembling of the woman's hands and the uneven rhythm of her breath. The fire spirits that had forged her in the flames seemed to hum with approval, a quiet vibration that echoed in the stones beneath the shrine. Though Naledi did not move forward, her presence was undeniable, a living witness to the stepmother's truth. The confession carried weight not only because it was spoken but because it was finally honest, free of deceit and self-preservation. As the stepmother finished speaking, falling forward onto the stones, exhausted and trembling, the river steam thickened for a moment before dispersing into the night sky. Naledi remained in the shadows, her embered form unseen, yet her eyes glimmered with recognition. She understood the pain, the fear, and the acknowledgement of guilt, and she knew that the stepmother's confession was the first ripple in the tide of justice that had begun with fire. The girl of quiet flames, once trapped, now watched, listening, learning, and preparing, her presence a reminder that truth, once revealed, could never be buried, and that the fire that forged her spirit would never forget. At last, the moment of reckoning arrived. The villagers had gathered in uneasy silence, whispers of fear traveling faster than the wind, when Naledi revealed herself fully. She emerged from the shadows, her form glowing like molten ember, her hair trailing like smoke in the night air, and eyes blazing with the quiet power of the fire that had forged her. Every step she took left faint trails of light upon the earth, illuminating the trembling faces of those who had dared to harm her. The chief's sons, who had once swaggered through the village with arrogance and pride, now froze as their worst fears manifested in the girl they had thought weak and fragile. They tried to flee, stumbling over uneven ground, but the fire itself seemed to rise before them, bending and twisting into walls and barriers, blocking every path, closing every escape. Their breaths came in sharp gasps as panic took hold. Their swords and spears, once symbols of strength, had long since betrayed them with heat that burned at their touch. The villagers watched in awe and terror as the two young men's faces turned pale, sweat pouring down their cheeks, their limbs trembling as if the very earth had conspired with the spirit of the girl they had tormented. The truth, which had remained hidden until now, poured from their lips in ragged, desperate confessions. "We only set the fire to teach her fear," one stammered, his voice cracking. "We thought she would scream, we thought she would run, but when she didn't, we panicked." His brother nodded frantically, tears running down his face, unable to meet the gaze of the embered figure before them. Every lie, every cruel intention, every moment of pride and arrogance spilled into the night, exposed in the glow of the fire that would not be denied. Naledi's expression remained calm, her embered form radiating a light both terrifying and majestic. She did not strike them, did not reach out with hands of flame to burn flesh. Instead, she summoned the fire spirits who had guided her, who had circled her in visions and whispers, and they moved silently around the guilty men. The spirits marked the chief's sons with glowing scars upon their arms, their chests, and their backs, trails of light that seared into skin not with heat, but with the undeniable presence of justice. These marks would never fade, a permanent reminder of cruelty confronted, of power misused, of the girl who had walked through fire and returned stronger than any human wrath could destroy. The chief's sons fell to their knees, trembling, not from flame but from the crushing weight of shame. The villagers watched in hushed silence as the young men bowed their heads, the realization of their actions burning more fiercely than any fire could. The steps they had taken in arrogance, the lives they had disrupted, the cruelty they had inflicted upon Naledi, every one of these sins was laid bare, unshielded, and undeniable. And though their bodies remained unburned, their pride and arrogance had been stripped away, leaving only guilt and the glowing reminder of a spirit who would not be silenced, a girl who had become something greater than life, greater than fear, greater than vengeance itself. Naledi remained standing, a glowing figure of ember and smoke, the quiet girl no one had ever understood, now a force of awe and reverence. She had not come to destroy, but to illuminate truth, to mark the guilty and let justice take its course without unnecessary cruelty. The fire spirits whispered around her, their presence like a soft hum of approval, and the villagers, wide-eyed and trembling, understood for the first time that some flames were not meant to consume, some were meant to reveal, to forge, and to endure. And so, in the glow of the embered girl, the guilty men learned that shame, once felt, could burn far hotter than any fire, and that a spirit forged in flames could never be ignored. Naledi turned from the chaos she had wrought, the fire spirits swirling softly around her, and approached the one who had caused her the deepest pain, her stepmother. The woman, trembling and pale, sank to her knees, expecting wrath, punishment, a fiery retribution for years of cruelty and deceit. But Naledi's embered figure moved with a calmness that surprised even the spirits themselves. She leaned close, the heat of her presence gentle rather than destructive, and placed a warm hand upon her stepmother's cheek. The touch was soft, glowing with ember light that was more comforting than terrifying, more forgiving than vengeful. "Fear made you cruel," she said quietly, her voice a melody of both sorrow and strength. "Fire has freed me from you." The stepmother's body shook as sobs racked her frame. Tears fell freely onto the stones, soaking the hems of her garments, as the years of jealousy, lies, and cruelty poured out in a torrent she could no longer hold back. She fell forward, pressing her face into her hands, whispering over and over for forgiveness, begging for a chance to undo what could not be undone. Every harsh word she had spoken to Naledi, every cruel glance, every stolen possession and stolen moment of happiness she had inflicted came back to her in the quiet power of the embered girl standing above her. Yet Naledi did not turn away in anger, did not withdraw the warmth of her hand, nor allow the fire spirits to punish the woman further. She allowed her to face the truth of her actions, to feel the weight of guilt and fear, but she did not let vengeance consume her. Slowly, Naledi withdrew her hand, leaving behind a trace of soot on her stepmother's skin. The mark was faint, almost like a shadow of warmth, yet it glowed faintly in the dark. It was a sign, a reminder that life had been spared, that mercy had been chosen over wrath, and that the path to redemption was not lost even after years of cruelty. The stepmother lifted her face, seeing the embered glow fade, and understood in that moment that the girl she had tormented was no longer the timid, silent child she had once tried to suppress. Naledi had been reborn in fire, forged in suffering, and had chosen to rise above hatred, teaching the village that true strength was not in destruction, but in the courage to forgive. The air around them was still, the fire spirits receding into shadows, their presence gentle now as if approving the choice of mercy. The villagers, who had watched from afar, whispered among themselves, sensing the power of the moment even if they could not fully see it. They understood that Naledi had shown them all a lesson in justice tempered with compassion, that the flames could teach fear but also liberation. The stepmother remained on the stones, her hands soiled with soot yet her heart lighter, knowing that she had lived, not because the fire had spared her, but because Naledi had chosen to show mercy. And so, in the quiet aftermath, Naledi's glow softened, the embered trails fading into the night. She had faced cruelty, endured pain, and been reborn from flames stronger than anyone could have imagined. Yet her final act was not destruction, but a gift of understanding, that even the guilty could be spared if mercy, tempered with justice, was the choice made by the one who had walked through fire and returned unbroken. As the first light of dawn spilled over the village of Malapo, painting the thatched roofs and winding paths in soft gold, Naledi walked through the quiet streets. The night's chaos had faded into uneasy murmurs and scattered whispers, but now the village was bathed in a light that revealed everything with clarity. For the first time, the villagers saw her fully, not just as a shadow or a flicker in the corner of their eyes, but as a girl transformed, made of glowing ember, radiant and alive with power yet softened by a quiet, gentle strength. Her hair trailed like smoke in the morning breeze, and her eyes held the calm of one who had endured fire and emerged unbroken. The people of Malapo stopped in their tracks, fear mingling with awe as they beheld her. The children who had once seen only a quiet, timid girl now looked upon a being who seemed born of fire itself, radiant yet compassionate. The elders, who had whispered tales of spirits and omens, felt the weight of her presence settle upon their hearts. Even the chief, hardened by authority, bowed his head slightly, understanding that what they had all witnessed was not mere magic or trickery, but a truth forged in flames and tempered by endurance. Naledi moved slowly, deliberately, her gaze sweeping over the village and resting on each person who had hidden cruelty in the shadows, each one who had failed to speak the truth when it mattered most. She spoke only once, her voice soft yet carrying across the waking village like a gentle wind over burning embers. "Do not bury truth in ashes," she said, and the words resonated with an authority that demanded attention and reflection. They were not a threat nor a warning of punishment. They were a reminder, a lesson carried from fire to flesh, from suffering to understanding, a message the villagers would carry for the rest of their lives. Then, as the sunlight touched the tips of the huts and the hills beyond, her form began to dissolve. The embered glow softened, spiraling into delicate tendrils of warm smoke that drifted upward, swirling in the morning air. The villagers watched in silence, mesmerized as she rose, leaving behind only traces of warmth and the faint scent of fire in the breeze. Every step, every movement had been purposeful, every ember and spark a testament to the resilience that had carried her through cruelty and betrayal. By the time she disappeared beyond the hills, the village was still, hearts heavy with wonder, fear and understanding. They would speak of this dawn for generations, the day when fire walked among them not to punish but to teach. They would remember the glowing girl who had endured, who had shown mercy, who had embodied both the ferocity and the compassion of fire. And in the gentle rising smoke, they sensed that she was not gone, not truly but watching, guarding and reminding all who dwelled in Malapo that truth, once forged, could never be buried beneath ashes. Years passed, and the village of Malapo changed in ways that could never have been imagined before the night the fire spoke. The story of Naledi, the girl of quiet flames who had walked through fire and returned as the embered one, became legend, whispered from parent to child around hearths and at the edges of the market. She was no longer just a girl who had endured cruelty, she was a symbol of resilience, a spirit of justice and mercy, a reminder that even the quiet and the gentle carried power beyond the understanding of those who sought to harm them. Every child learned the tale, the weight of her story shaping how they treated one another, fostering respect for the voiceless, the timid, the overlooked, and the gentle souls who might otherwise have been dismissed. The fire festival, once a celebration of heat and bravery, now carried a deeper meaning. As the villagers lit their torches each year, they noticed the flames bending gently toward the innocent, as if guided by the unseen hand of Naledi herself. No child who had shown kindness or courage went unnoticed, no humble elder was forgotten, and every household understood that the fire had a memory, a will, and a spirit that rewarded truth and compassion. Even the elders who had once doubted and whispered, now taught the young to honor those who endured suffering quietly, to understand that strength did not always roar and that courage sometimes spoke in whispers and gentle gestures. Stories said that Naledi still walked with the fire spirits, a guardian invisible to all but those who paid attention to the subtle signs, the flicker of flame in the hearth, the curling smoke over a cooking pot, the warmth that lingered in the wind at dawn. She protected those who were wronged, guided the timid, and watched over the village with a vigilance that was both gentle and unyielding. Her presence reminded the villagers that cruelty carried consequences, that lies and arrogance could never completely hide from the truth, and that even the smallest, quietest voice had the power to endure, to rise and to change hearts and lives. Whenever someone believed they could silence truth, whenever fear or arrogance tempted a villager to dismiss justice, the air would carry a faint warmth, the shadows flickered like embers, and whispers would ripple through the night, a reminder that Naledi was near. She did not need to speak. Her very existence, her journey through fire and her choice of mercy, spoke volumes. Children grew up hearing the tales, weaving them into their games, their songs, and their understanding of right and wrong. Adults remembered the lessons of fire, justice, and mercy in their dealings, their homes, and their fields. And so, Naledi's legacy endured, not just as a story told around fires, but as a living truth in the hearts of Malapo's people. The Embered One had shown that power did not require cruelty, that vengeance could be tempered with mercy, and that the quietest, gentlest voices could ignite change that would last for generations. In every crackling flame, in every curling wisp of smoke, the villagers sensed her presence, guiding them, reminding them, and protecting them. And those who believed that fire could silence truth learned year after year that it was only the flames that carried her spirit, and with it the eternal lesson that truth, once forged, could never be buried.